This is Eitan Weinstein.
And I'm Naor Menninger, and you're listening to Two Nice Jewish Boys.
In collaboration with Australian Jewish News, check them out at ajn.timesofisrael.com. Also in collaboration with Arutz Sheva, israelnationalnews.com. About a month ago, 300 Israelis stripped naked and posed in the middle of the desert. This demonstration was part of an art installation photographed by world-renowned photographer Spencer Tunick. And this wasn't the first time. Back in 2011, there were 1,200 subjects, all naked, photographed by Tunick. But all this wasn't done to simply photograph a bunch of nudists in the middle of the desert. There was a bigger motivation. Ari Leon Fruchter, the man...
Fruchter and a man.
Excuse me. Ari Leon Fruchter, the man who staged this whole thing, hopes these images will raise awareness and ignite a wave of activism that may help slow or even stop the disappearance of the Dead Sea. We are thrilled to be joined today by Ari Leon Fruchter to talk nudism, environmentalism, and activism, and maybe some other isms. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, first of all, sorry. I hate when people get my name wrong, so I apologize. So where did this crazy idea come from?
I mean, it actually was an evolution. Spencer Tunick is an artist and close friend that I've known for about 30 years. We met in New York back in 1992 when I was a fashion designer, and Paper Magazine wanted to do a feature on me. And he was freelancing. He had just finished a school of visual arts and was looking to establish himself as an artist. But on the side, he was doing some work for Paper. We met in his apartment on St. Mark's Place, this like tiny studio that had like a bathtub in the kitchen. And he said, okay.
Sounds like an average Tel Aviv apartment.
You know what? Yes, but the bathtub was really, really cool. It was about half the size of the place. And of course, like, fire escape where we could actually like go out and get some fresh air.
Wow.
And he's like, hey, let me take a picture of you for the for the magazine. He had me like wear some of my clothing. He had me bite an apple and put it into and stick a fork into it and then bite on the fork. And that was a picture that he chose, or Paper chose for the feature. And as we were going through the session, he understood that I was Jewish. He let me know that he was Jewish. And we kind of like connected on that level, just hearing about our backgrounds. And he said, you know what, I'm not really a commercial photographer. I'm an artist. Let me show you what I'm doing. And he took out some early photos of his, which were basically photographing individual portraits on the streets of New York, usually with some crazy props and naked. And I looked at it and I was like, wow, how the hell are you doing this? This is completely cool and insane. And he said, you know what, you want to help me? I'm like, sure. So I would actually, help him on some of these, shoots that he would do. We'd like, guerrilla style.
Were they underground? Like, were they legal? Were they?
Oh, it was completely illegal.
Oh, that's awesome.
How so?
How so? I believe, public nudity, is just not something which is,
in New York, maybe.
In the
not downtown New York?
Not back then, it wasn't allowed. Today, of course, it's very different. No, but he would,
Today, if you walk down New York clothes, people look at you weird.
He would say, okay, meet me 5 o'clock in the morning, and sometimes he would shoot socialites that wanted to be, in his photos. He would literally just walk around the city and just like stop people and say, hey, do you want to pose for me? And he had the gift of gab. He could convince anyone, to pose for himself. So
on the spot, they would strip naked.
Not on the spot. He would, talk to someone, tell them who he is, show some pictures, and people were like, yeah, I do it. So I remember like he did Tatiana von Furstenberg, the daughter of Diane von Furstenberg. I was like, how the hell did you get her?
Who is?
Diane von Furstenberg, Barry Diller's wife. If that name rings a bell.
Nope.
No. Is this like New York intelligentsia?
New York socialite, but also very, very famous fashion designer, very famous billionaire.
Okay.
So like their daughter, and all kinds of like B-level celebrities like in New York.
Yeah.
And literally like 5 o'clock in the morning we get together. Right when it starts to get light, he would say, okay, disrobe, Ari, hold the clothing, look out for the police, snap, snap, snap. And police would come, we'd run, and that was it.
Did they ever come after him? I mean, they knew eventually who took the photo because you'd probably publish them or whatever. Did they ever try and track him down?
Yes, but like from a different point in his career. So this is how it kind of started. And I actually took some of the images and I used them for my fashion company. I would do what we call today a collab, where I would do like a drop of 200 t-shirts with one artwork on it. Mm-hmm. And I put them to different stores around the country, and they'd sell out. We create posters, and we actually used to go around New York City at night and just on our own just like put these posters up until the mob chased us away. So
actually the mob.
Yeah, because you just can't put posters up. They're like each wall is controlled by someone.
Even today in Tel Aviv,
we had no idea.
That, by the way.
The ad space on the walls is controlled by organized crime?
It's New York City.
Even in Tel Aviv.
The garbage, the walls, everything.
Guys, in Tel Aviv, you also cannot put a sign without... if you wanted to stay, you got to pay...
protection to the to the mafia?
Yeah,
or
in Tel Aviv. Yes.
It's not like organized. It's not organized.
It's organized in terms of they'll organize. Yeah. They'll come together and they'll hurt you if you don't.
Yeah. It's not.
No, I mean, if you keep doing that, you'll be in trouble. They will hurt you.
It's kind of ironic though to put a photo of a nudist on a T-shirt.
Well, it's not a nudist. I mean, first of all, it's artwork.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying
the people that are doing it, they're not people that normally want to be naked.
Yeah.
For most people, it's the first time they're doing it. It's transformative. They want to be part of an art process.
Wow.
So I mean, it's definitely not about nudism at all.
And how what is that process like for those people? I mean, you had like front row seats to it. So I mean, how would he convince them, and how So
this is 92, 93 when we worked together.
Yeah.
And part of my fashion company was he wasn't the only artist. I decided to work with a whole slew of artists. Uh-huh. But Spencer took up so much of my attention because he was really 100% in it. He needed my help. Mm-hmm. And at a certain point, he during that period, he took a trip to Israel. Mm-hmm. It turns out that he's got family here. Mm-hmm. His aunt, I guess in college, came here to study, met an Israeli, got married, have kids. So he's got first cousins here. And I guess throughout his life, he's traveled to Israel. And when his grandparents, retired, they moved to Netanya, to the Four Seasons. And then eventually when his father retired, he also moved to Israel. So he's had this draw of coming to Israel. Every time he'd come to Israel, he'd actually do some photos here. This is in the early 90s, but no one knew about it. He wasn't known. So he showed me some pictures, and he came back that he took actually in Jerusalem, in the Via Dolorosa. I was like, oh my God, how did you do that? That's insane. And it was. So we kept this friendship. Eventually, my fashion company kind of blew up, and I started traveling outside the U.S., living in Paris and Milan. And eventually his career kind of blew up. He actually went from doing these individual portraits to doing what he calls group installations. And the first group ones he did were around the same time that you had, unfortunately, the first Intifada in Israel. And there were these bus bombings. And his reaction...
First or second?
I think it was the first one.
The first was like 89.
89 till when? So this...
Till 89.
You're talking to early 2000s?
So it's the second Intifada.
The second one, in early 2000.
Yeah.
So that's when he started to do more these groups. He went from individuals. He started off in New York, and then he went across the United States. There's two documentaries about him. One is called Naked States, where he traveled all around the U.S. and did an installation, individual one, in every state. And he also did another one called Naked World, where he traveled around the world doing it. But it started to evolve in terms of mass participations as a reaction to some of the bus bombings in Israel that he saw. So there, he called them more like celebrations of life, but that was an early influence that he doesn't really talk much about. And as it started to get bigger, and in New York, I guess in the late 90s and the early 2000s, when Rudolph Giuliani was the mayor, he started to really clean up and change the whole fabric of the city. And that's the time when they start to target Spencer and arrest him. Every time he tried to do an installation, he'd get arrested. And it happened so often that eventually he got good legal representation. And it became kind of like one of these marquee cases about freedom of speech through the First Amendment. And it went to the Supreme Court, and he actually won that his work is actually considered, art. And it's something which is, allowed, even though it's nude, on the streets of America.
That's
but
so interesting.
From that point, he just started to travel the world, and these installations, grew and grew in size. And and my career changed. I left from fashion to high tech. I moved from New York, to Israel, then to Seattle, and to Philadelphia, then back to Israel. But we've always stayed in touch. And when I came back to Israel in 2007, I joined the board of the Tel Aviv Museum of Art. which was a very kind of like surreal opportunity.
How come? Because you're an art collector, or?
Kind of, yeah. My family were original founders of the Israel Museum in Jerusalem.
Okay.
And my great aunt, she actually lived inside the museum. Her name was Charlotte Bergman. She had her own private house.
Right, and you can visit that house today, right? It's
unfortunately not.
You could though, in certain.
It's really restricted. I mean,
Yeah.
the Israel Museum, for example, when Spencer was here and we had a press conference in Jerusalem, we actually scheduled to have a tour of the museum and to visit the house. And the last minute, the museum denied us entrance to the house.
Right. Once every few years, I think they open it for like one day. That house in the perimeter or something.
Yeah, you're talking about the Beit Lefnim, and that was
Batimi B'fnim.
that was many years ago. Since then, they really haven't opened it.
How come?
I think that there's probably some suspicious activities around the house that the museum doesn't want the public to have access to it, because they've denied me access, with Spencer.
And you're actually a descendant.
Yes, and they've also my parents came to visit, back for Shavuot, and we wanted to visit the house, and they denied us entrance.
What kind of suspicious activity? What do you mean?
I can't say with certainty, but she had a very, very, very special art collection that today is probably worth the hundreds of millions of dollars. And the museum took over the entire estate.
Well, how did that happen? I mean, is there no legal battle going on? I mean,
she must have inherited.
Did she leave it to the museum?
It's a question mark. I don't know.
Wow.
I what I do know, because I learned everything about art through my aunt and my years coming to Israel. When I lived here from '97 to 2001, I visited her regularly. The art were her children. She was unfortunately unable to conceive any children. She had many miscarriages, and she threw her love into collecting art and to Zionism and to supporting the museum.
Tell us her name again, because
Charlotte Bergman.
Charlotte Bergman.
She was a real Renaissance woman. She died at the age of 99. Lived in the museum for about 30 years. And I think, she really wanted the house to be open to the public.
Mm-hmm.
She wanted, she didn't want to keep it, the best secret in Israel. So from that perspective.
And now it's owned by the state?
I mean, the Israel Museum owns it. It's actually built inside the museum. So it's at a certain point, she was like a prisoner living inside the Israel Museum. But it's probably the best asset the museum has. And from my perspective, it should be open to the public. Everyone in Israel should have the opportunity to see it.
Who owns the museum? The city of Jerusalem, or?
I don't know the legal structure, but I assume that there's...
So you came to be at the board?
The board of the Tel Aviv Museum of Art.
Yeah.
And this was, I guess, based upon my experience in the art world. From my aunt, from artists like Spencer Tunick I had built relationships with. And at the time, Mati Omer was running the museum. He was a real, I'd say, a real important figure in the Israeli art world in terms of super scholar. He published maybe 10 to 20 books a year. He ran the art department at Tel Aviv University. He ran the museum as well as the gallery at the university. Many people today who work in the art field, they owe their knowledge to Mati. So he was all in. He also didn't have children. He was completely committed to art. And when he met me, he felt that there was an opportunity to bring someone young onto the board, someone's coming from outside of Israel, other experiences, other connections, to help make it more interesting. So I was glad to join. And at that point, he said, come to me with any interesting ideas you have. What artists do you have? What kind of exhibitions could we do? So I said, well, I've got this friend Spencer Tunick. What do you think about doing something together in Israel? He loved the idea, was very supportive. But unfortunately, I think it was in 2008, 2009, the economic crisis hit everyone. And it just wasn't the time to realize that kind of vision. So he said, listen, you want to do it, you go ahead. I'll support you from the museum, but go make it happen. And it took me about a few years to realize that. During that process, Mati Omer fell ill and eventually passed away. So he wasn't really able to help along the way. But I was successful in terms of accomplishing something that I had no idea was possible. When I thought about a large-scale installation in Israel, I said, who's going to do it? Everyone here knows each other. The embarrassment of seeing your teacher, your dentist, the guy from the Makolet.
Your podcast co-host.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I don't want to see your junk.
We knew someone from our studies that was actually in one of the shoots.
There
was one. There wasn't there wasn't only the one in 2011 and this one a month ago. There were a few. There
was a secretive one that was done in 2016.
Yeah.
That was that one only.
You don't know who I'm talking about?
No.
We know someone. I'll tell you after.
I'm sure I know who that is then.
Is it a he or a she?
It's a she.
Oh, then I want to know.
Me too.
Well,
tattoos or no tattoos?
I mean, I don't know actually. I don't know. I don't think there was a close up at any point, so I don't know if she had or not.
And so when I want to realize this vision, I like to do things that I don't know how I'm going to do it. If I knew how to do it, then it's not challenging, it's not exciting. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, this is a cool project. Let me see if I can actually make this thing happen in Israel. And
But how did you decide to leave those apprehensions behind of like, oh, no one's going to want to do it?
Well, I mean, that was one aspect. And I said also, if I'm going to do it, I can't talk the talk and not walk the walk. Mm. And even though I've known Spencer for so long, I've never been interested or never had the courage to participate in one of his projects. Mm-hmm. So I started to do research, like everything. It's okay. I found out about a festival called Pashut, which is in a place called the Ashram B'Midbar, and there, clothing is optional. So you need to actually bring a partner with you, and I didn't know anyone I could take with me. So I reached out to them. I said, listen, this is who I am. I'd love to come. I'm working on a project with Spencer Tunick. He said, oh, really? Wow, Spencer Tunick, we know him. Sure, you could come. No problem. Be our guest. So I went to this festival, and during that weekend, I learned how I could shed my clothing, which was a big transformative, moment for me. I also understood that I don't really enjoy being naked. If maybe in some circumstances, yes, but I'm not a naturalist. It's not something which I want to do.
Publicly,
of course. Yeah, I'm not. That doesn't really, do it for me. But I'm capable of doing it, for the right reason. And after that weekend, I called Spencer. I said, Spencer, guess what? I found 500 people that are enthusiastic to be part of, and he said, what people? Tell me, where were you?
The perfect storm. And
I explained to him. He goes, no. These are not the right people. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, these people want to be naked all the time. They're looking for an excuse to be naked. Mm-hmm. My art is not about that. It's about people like yourself who haven't done it before and are coming together individually, to work with me to create something new and unique. Find those people. So I actually worked with the IDC. There's a new media school, I guess it's called. And they had the new media lab in the communication school. They decided to do a 1-year project where 6 students, basically using social media, created a campaign to bring Spencer Tunick to Israel. And that was kind of like a way to test to see if people would be interested in being a part of it. And I think one of the students was Roni Dioni, who's known as Roni Superstar. Mm-hmm. And the project was really successful. They built this, buzz. It was the early days of Facebook. We're talking about 2010, maybe 2009.
Before it was Meta.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe it was still the Facebook. I'm not even sure.
Yeah.
So it worked. Started to create interest. The media started to pick up on it in Israel, and as the media picked up, I think Roni Duani's agent got a little bit upset, and she was taken out of the project, and then the school kind of canceled it. But at least I knew that from the students that there was definitely demand, and then I decided I had to raise money for it. And I thought it would be something that'd be relatively easy. He's a famous artist. We're gonna do something that's gonna create world impact in terms of when he does an installation, it's world headlines. But a few things happened in Israel. One, the nudism was really, really challenging. People that privately wanted to support it didn't want to have their business, didn't want to have their nonprofits, whatever could be associated with it, because they're afraid of the backlash from the religious world. And actually, the religious parties in the Knesset started to go ahead and actually jump on it, even before it actually happened. So I think Shas tried to create a law called the Spencer Tunick law, which basically outlawed any public nudity, whether it's just someone getting naked or if it's someone's doing it for art or for commercial purposes.
It's also funny that his name is Tunick. I just realized, right?
Yeah, it's a good pun. So they and then there was other party called Beit Yehudi, and they actually had public debates with them about it, and I couldn't understand why people were so concerned about this. It's like it's an artist. I mean, how many artists in the world that have a public audience that are famous are actually willing to come to Israel and create something special here, especially someone who actually cares and loves Israel.
I think also, especially if it's like, I maybe get it if the Haredim are against having like him shoot people at the Western Wall or, in a public space, but in the middle of the desert, or if it's not even in that religious of a city and it's at a time that most people aren't around, like you can find arrangements to do it. Like,
I think it's about, publicity.
Yeah.
it was getting media attention here, so they wanted to also get media attention.
Just,
So they jumped on this.
it,
But there's other things that are probably much more important for them to spend their time on. But in
Mhm.
terms of location, so this was an evolutionary process. Eventually, I decided to raise the money through Kickstarter, and I met David Broza, who had just done a Kickstarter campaign for a Spanish album, and he was successful with it. So I asked him about it. He said, "Well, if I could do it, then for sure Spencer Tunick could do it. Who's much more famous than me." And it took a lot of convincing to Spencer to do a Kickstarter campaign. He said, "Well, I'm asking for money. How are people going to perceive me? And if I fail, how's that going to look?" And I actually had to fly to New York and arrange a meeting, with the founder of Kickstarter to kind of calm down his fears. And usually they don't meet people privately. I had a connection to the founder of Kickstarter. Actually, his mother and Spencer's aunt both live on Kibbutz Revivim. Coincidentally. Small world.
Classic Jewish
No wonder
Israeli
we rule
story.
the world.
Yeah.
So they after the meeting, Spencer was convinced that they were a serious company, serious about art. He said, "Okay, I'll do it under your name. So if it fails, you're responsible for it." So I did the campaign myself, and we raised $117,000.
Wow.
It was the largest raise for an art project, at the time. And afterwards, like artists like Marina Abranovich kind of followed our steps, and she raised $1 million to build something that she never actually built. But
Yet another Kickstarter, like investors who never got their money back and were scammed out of that.
Wait, was this a similar model to the one that was just done right now, so that people who invested participated? Or
it was actually really different. I mean, so back then, we decided when Spencer was thinking about locations in Israel, he said, "Okay, there's two places that interest me." He said one is Tel Aviv, which is kind of like the heart and soul of the country today. If you're going to do something big, it's going to happen in Tel Aviv. Or he said, "You know what? I'm really curious about the Dead Sea." I remember as a child kind of like going there, floating, seeing on the Israeli side, all the miracles of Israel, what they did with the desert. They, how they have like date trees there, and you have the freshwater springs of En Gedi, and he had this romantic vision of the Dead Sea and how it's this, amazing place, lowest place in the world, on the earth, that's shared between the Palestinians or Jordanians and the Israelis. We're all kind of like caretakers of it. So he wanted to explore that. So I brought him here on a scouting trip, and we, explored both. And when we started to kind of go through, we went to the Dead Sea, we were actually taught about the environmental issues the Dead Sea were facing. We had no idea about the declining, water levels and how drastic, it was. We actually took the first boat that's now very popular, across the Dead Sea, scouting locations. And there was going to be this competition for the new 7 wonders of nature. And Israel had made the decision to have the Dead Sea as part of that. So they really worked hard to convince us, saying, if you're going to do it anywhere, choose the Dead Sea. We were working with the Megillot Regional Council, which claims to be the poorest regional council in Israel. And they said, listen, we can't give you much financial support, but we'll give you location of your choice. We'll give you, permissions that you need, and either insurance, just basic infrastructure to actually make it happen. And he calculated the costs. And then we looked at Tel Aviv, and around Chudah. He said, you know what? I'll give you Kikar Rabin if you want. I'll give you, any of the beaches, and which was a nice offer. But then we started to calculate the production costs. It was quite high. And they said, okay, Tel Aviv, you're a pretty rich municipality. How much are you willing to offer? They didn't have any financial support for it. So I said, okay, with those two, if I'm going to go out and have to raise money, since the pre-Kickstarter, I want to do it for something that's going to make a bigger impact. So we chose the environmental angle and the Dead Sea. And that kind of started,
That was what year?
I mean, the installation was in 2011, but we were already scouting, back in, 2 years earlier.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And it was successful?
Back in 2009. It was extremely successful, but extremely challenging. So even though, we succeeded in raising money, from Kickstarter, we had everything basically about 6,000 people registered to be a part of it, but the Megillot Council said you could only have 1,200 people. So we had to, in order to ensure that people were actually going to show up and to keep to the right number, we charged people. We charged them 70 shekel, which included transportation back and forth, because they told us no cars. You have to take, arrange for buses to bring people there. And of course, everyone that participates in Spencer's works actually gets an image afterwards. So for 70 shekel, people got transportation, and they also got, a work of art. So yeah, we had 1,200 people that came. About 10% of them were people that flew in from around the world. Just wanted to be a part of this. So, and about 2 weeks beforehand, the Megilot Regional Council canceled everything. They, right when I'm about to realize like this amazing project I'm working on for years, it's something I'm going to really enjoy and be proud of. All
Decades
of a sudden,
at this point, no? I mean, it sounds like you were working on it since like...
we started planning it in 2008.
Yeah, but you had started thinking about this and trying. I mean, you were saying that you guys had been trying already for a while. Like,
I mean, we go back 30
when you
years.
were on the board of the Museum of Tel Aviv.
Yeah, so that's like in 2008 when we first started. Okay, and then we actually did it in 2011. So there was like a 3-year.
So why did they cancel? Because of pressure from the Haredim?
So when I was, when I sat with the mayor, the former mayor, of Megilot, I asked him, I said, I just want to make sure before I go out there and I publicly try to raise money that no matter what, this is going to happen. He goes, no, we're secular here. We hate the religious. That's not going to hold us back at all. Well, 2 weeks before the installation, after everything's a go, the artist is ready to fly into the country. We've got no location. Now, the Dead Sea is not a simple place. I'll tell you what happened. You can't just say, okay, great, I'll pick another location. There are no locations. The entire northern part of the Dead Sea is almost completely closed off to people because of sinkholes today. You only have a few, beaches that are available. And then the southern
It's also under military, right? It's a sea.
No, it's not the military thing. It's literally the fact that because of the sinkholes, you actually cannot get to the water. So you have when you drive down from Jerusalem, you have like Tzomet Lido, which is close to Kibbutz Kalya. You have 3 public beaches there, which is Neve Midbar, Binkini, and Kalya, and they're not the most beautiful beaches at all. But you have access there, and you pay for that access. And then when you come along, you have Mitzukei Dorgot, which is not a public beach. It's a raw beach, and you can't bring 1,200 people down there to do an installation. It'd be too dangerous. And then you had a place called Mineral Beach, and which was by Mitzveh Shalem, and that was the location that we chose. But then afterwards, you get to Ein Gedi, and the Ein Gedi, there was a promenade back then, and there was a beach area, and then you continue past Masada. There's a commercial spa, and then that's it. You're done. When you get to the hotels, that's not really the Dead Sea. All that water is kind of pumped in or stolen from the northern basin of the Dead Sea.
Right.
And everything there is artificial.
It's the southern lake.
It's a reservoir for the Dead Sea factories.
Yeah.
And that exists for the Dead Sea's business. And because it existed, the government partnered with them and decided to build the tourism infrastructure around there. So and that's not a location that you'd want to shoot because it's not really the Dead Sea.
Just in a short, brief sentence, it was once an entire sea until I guess 1979 or something, and it dried mainly because of Jordan, Syria blocking water sources to the Jordan River, and also Israel taking water from the Kinneret. Thus, less water flooded to the Dead Sea and made it smaller.
That's definitely part of it, but at the end of the day, water evaporates, and it comes back in the form of rain.
Yeah.
So that rain is brought back in, but because water is so valuable in Israel, going back then and even today,
and in
with
Syria and
with
Jordan.
their neighbors, so people siphon there's a water shortage, so they decided, actually we decided to also dam, the Jordan River to keep everything in the Kinneret, which is our water reservoir. Had we not done that, we wouldn't have had a country. Water is life, so it was a decision. No one really knew how that would affect ourselves today. So one of the things that people didn't know about were sinkholes. So you figure, okay, there's less water, that's fine. But over time, the ground became unsafe and unstable and basically opened up. And once it opens up, it's almost like an earthquake. Once it opens up, it can't be refilled. You're done. So Mineral Beach, which was the location that we chose in 2011, today doesn't exist anymore. The entire thing collapsed into a sinkhole. Ein Gedi Beach doesn't exist at all. The road 90 that passes through Ein Gedi completely opened up because of a sinkhole. Now there's a bypass road. So the ramifications we're seeing every day. And it's not just on the Israeli side. even under the Jordanian side as well. But getting back to Megillot,
How did you solve the?
So they canceled 2 weeks ahead.
2 weeks ahead, and they went publicly against us, saying that we're pulling out because this art installation is no longer about the environment. It's about religion, which was never the case at all. We had
They claimed that?
They claimed that, yeah.
Going behind your back, meaning they never...
Behind their back. I mean, they literally, unilaterally pulled out. They didn't tell us anything. I went down there immediately. I drove down because I couldn't get on the phone. I didn't know what to do. And remember, I collected $117,000 on Kickstarter in my name. If it fails, I'm responsible for it. And the last thing I want to do is take people's money and not give them what I promised. So I went down with a friend and we recorded the conversation. And we understood that the mayor was bribed to basically pull out. Shas, who at that time ran the Ministry of Interior, basically, I don't know what they said, but probably said, listen, you've got a lot of workers here that are non-Israeli, foreign workers. If you don't want to lose them, you want to keep your funding, you need to pull out this project. So they pulled out, and I didn't back down. When Spencer arrived, it was the most stressful period of my life. I had a team of Spencer and about 7 other people that came down for this installation. Everyone thinks it's about to happen. And in the meantime, I've got no location.
Did you tell Spencer about all that, or did you
I told him, but I said, no, I'll figure it out. Don't worry. He's an artist, just wants to create his art. So when he comes here, I mean, he gets into this zone, and it's all about creating the most amazing experience and art. Mm-hmm. And to come here and find out there's no location, I was plotting out all kinds of places that we could do it, because I promised that would happen. So I had to at least in the minimum try to do something. And I hired a very expensive lawyer who was very politically connected. And we threatened to sue the Megillot Council and take this case publicly up to the Supreme Court. Literally, B'dakad Tishim, this is, the installation took place, on a Saturday morning. Friday, maybe 2 hours before Shabbat, we got the okay from Megillot that they're going to give us the original location.
Wow.
But I have to pay for it personally, and we have to make sure that we vacate the location by 8 a.m. So,
wow.
I paid with my credit card. I got there. I'm a Masorti, so I don't work on Shabbat. So I got there before Shabbat. I basically paid, stayed there, slept, waited for everyone to show up, and just kind of worked along. That worked. I basically was there with Spencer for support, but I gave up all my responsibilities to other people to actually have them run the production. But
wow.
it was terrifying. Had that not happened, we were going to probably go to that time the Ein Gedi beach. And at least just have everyone go in the water and have Spencer take a picture. It wouldn't have been the nicest picture. Would have been artistic because we didn't have much time to work with. But at least to actually do it. By hook or by crook, this was going to happen. And the fact that it happened was just a real, godsend, in terms of for Israel. I mean, the media attention was spectacular. You had an artist that no one ever knew that he was Jewish. He never actually identified being Jewish with his work. Finally opened up about that. Said some of the most amazing things to the media about how incredible Israel is. It's the only place in the Middle East that can actually create this kind of work. Mm-hmm. And I think we did just an incredible job in terms of promoting and making people aware of the Dead Sea and some of the issues it was facing. It helped it become today recognized as the 8th wonder of nature, not the 7th, but it really this got put it on the map in a meaningful way.
Your Dead Sea obsession commenced.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very naive in the things that I do and love, and I assumed that if I brought 1,200 people down to the Dead Sea for the most incredible experience of their life, and they understood that we're here because we're trying to raise an environmental awareness, that they would go home and maybe think about it and do something. And I was surprised. I'm not Israeli. I didn't grow up here. I figured all these Israelis probably would care about it more than me, and people loved it. If you meet anyone today who's been a part of an installation, they'll say how it's one of the most important things in their life. But no one took on the mantle of actually helping the Dead Sea. And I thought, wow, if I fought Shas, if I fought the Knesset and all these evil powers in the country, Dead Sea factories, and I succeeded in actually making this happen and making this incredible awareness, maybe I could continue and do some more work that would actually help the Dead Sea, cause people to take action. So it's an obsession which I haven't succeeded with. It's been a failure to some degree, because as much as that project succeeded, to me it failed because no one else I thought that it's
Followed up.
I thought there'd be people there, and there are amazing people there that are much more capable than me that would start some kind of activity, and nothing happened.
So let's maybe get back to the environmental issue. Can you tell us why you're fighting for the Dead Sea so vigilantly, and what you believe needs to be done there, and why?
So it's something which has happened. Sometimes the most amazing things in life, they're coincidences. So I wasn't aware of the Dead Sea in terms of from the environmental issues until I went down with Spencer. And if I think about, Israel and about our responsibility, in the greater world, we don't own the Dead Sea. The Jordanians don't own it. The Palestinians don't own it. We're collectively caretakers of a very, very special, unique place. And why can't we, at least on the Israeli side, do something to preserve it, for our generation and for future generations to come?
Like what?
So it's a good question. So I thought that the solution would require investment, not just locally, it would actually require investment globally. And I thought I connected 1,200 people. How could I continue with that idea and connect more and more people to the Dead Sea? I mean, it's very well known. I mean, everyone knows the Dead Sea, thanks to especially the Israelis and all the malls around the world selling Dead Sea products. But people believe the Dead Sea minerals are good for you. So you have lots of commerce companies out there, the biggest one being Ahava, that are marketing using the Dead Sea material, the Dead Sea name, yet they're not actually giving anything back to the Dead Sea. And rather than actually, there's problem, there's solution, but there's also interim steps. So why not, have industry who's benefiting from it take a more active stance and actually return stuff back to the Dead Sea? So I started a company doing Dead Sea products as well for a little while. It was called Naked Sea Salt, and it was meant to be a social enterprise, an e-brand, e-commerce only, where I actually produced table salt in different flavors, from the Dead Sea. I did it. I raised the money through Kickstarter, and it was also very successful. And the idea was, through my company, I was actually giving a percentage of the money that we earned back to the Arava Institute, which had like the Transboundary Water Center. There's an expert there called Clive Lipkin who focuses on the Dead Sea and sinkholes. The idea was to take that money, invest it in research, create more documentation. Because if you go online and you try to find any information about the Dead Sea, it's all going to be commerce. It's all going to be propaganda. Nothing out there that really tells you what's actually happening there at all. So I wanted to start to create that channel. So we started to produce videos and put out educational material. And with each bottle of salt, there was information that was delivered with it about the Dead Sea. Because if you're going to put it in your food and ingest it in your body, you're going to create that connection with it. So that was my vision for this company. And I left my job in high tech to establish it. And I was hoping to inspire the other Dead Sea product companies to kind of follow suit, to take a better responsibility.
You were so naive.
I was naive and I failed. After 2 years, I realized that I'm not even getting close to replacing my high tech salary, and I can't afford to do this. If I was 20 years younger, living in my parents' basement, it'd been a cool business. But at that point in life, I couldn't make it happen. And e-commerce is complicated. Acquiring customers is expensive, and it didn't work. And it's funny. So a few years ago, I spoke at Fuck Up Nights in English in Tel Aviv, and you're supposed to talk about a failure. So I wanted to talk about Spencer Tunick and the Dead Sea in 2011, which I thought was a failure because I didn't inspire anyone to actually do anything about the Dead Sea. He said, no, you can't talk about that. That's a success. Okay. They said, find another angle. I'm like, oh yeah, right. I had this salt company that failed. Perfect. Yeah. So I actually, spoke about, Spencer Tunick in 2011 through the salt company, and the person who was working with me, from Fuck Up Nights and was giving me advice on how to speak and the format. He said, you know what? You're still really passionate about the Dead Sea. You should think about what you want to do next. And I said, oh God. I was kind of happy not doing much. Not doing much in terms of, I brought Spencer back in 2016. We did an installation in Mitzugei Dargot in the sinkholes. We got lots of world attention about that. Again, tension, awareness, nothing happened. Mm-hmm. Then I helped a friend of mine establish a nonprofit called the Dead Sea Revival Project. His name is Noam Bedin, and he was the original founder of the in Sderot. There's like a media center that they established in Sderot when they were getting pounded by rockets. And he as a photojournalist, he kind of discovered the Dead Sea on this boat that we spoke about earlier, and became super passionate about it, just documenting and trying to share that with the world. So I helped him establish this, Amuta called the Dead Sea Revival Project. And today, for example, he's on a speaking trip in the U.S. talking on college campuses about the Dead Sea and the environment. So,
And the museum.
So yeah, I'm about to get to that.
Okay.
So I was happy saying, you know what, I haven't solved the Dead Sea. Okay, it was really too big of a problem for me to figure out. I've tried all kinds of angles. It's so difficult because of the politics that are there, and it's very challenging. I said, well, it's not my job to save it, but maybe what else could I do? So fuck up nights, and I said, okay, with Noam, he's out there, he's documenting it, he's speaking about it, he's getting more awareness. I'm behind that Amuta. That's great. I could focus on my Tel Aviv life, my kids, my job. And then fuck up nights came, and they kind of planted the seed in my head. And I said, shit, what am I going to do? So at night, I couldn't sleep. And a couple of days later, I had this kind of epiphany saying, well, you know what? I really love art. I'm an art collector. I work with artists. There's nothing cultural at the Dead Sea at all. In fact, people complain of how boring it is, well, by the hotels especially. And I said, well, and there's also no visitor center. When you go down to the Dead Sea, there's no starting point, there's no ending point. You're kind of on your own. There's no information available at all. I said, what? Why can't I do something that will be culturally, significant and put the Dead Sea on the map for now, and for future generations? And I thought about Frank Gehry, the architect, who designed this incredible museum in a place called Bilbao, Spain. I had never heard of Bilbao before in my life. If I would think of the cities in Spain that I want to visit, Bilbao was never on in my consideration. But because of this incredible architectural masterpiece, not just me, but people all over the world became aware of Bilbao and actually traveled there to actually see the museum and visit inside. I said the Dead Sea, even though it's dying, it's not dead. I'm not a doctor. I can't save it, but I could help preserve it, and I could do that through art. So if something that you love is changing, why not create something that will represent it, forever? So I thought about the idea of creating not just a museum, an architectural masterpiece, something that people all over the world will wake up and pay attention to and actually want to come and visit.
A sculpture by itself.
Exactly.
In the desert.
Which is today, there's architectural tourism. People travel over the world to see this incredible buildings. So doesn't the Dead Sea deserve that? And not the Dead Sea where the hotels are, but the Dead Sea kind of proper. So I thought of locations for it, and of course this is a big idea, and even bigger than bringing Spencer Tunick to Israel.
Yeah.
And that I had no idea how I was going to do. It took me 3 years to eventually make it happen. This is going to take me quite a bit longer. To build a museum, first of all, you need to have land. So I started to say, okay, where could I actually build it? So I spoke again to the regional councils, to the Megillot Council, to the Tamar Council. And everyone's like, yes, yes, yes. But, in Israel, people say yes, and then they do the opposite. And there's no way that,
They're so stupid, though, because it's in their interest.
Yeah.
It is and it isn't. The Megillot Council, the Megillot Regional Council sits on, pre-67 land. And, they don't have much of a budget itself, so they're dependent upon the government.
Yeah.
And the Tamar Regional Council, who sits on Israeli proper land, they're the richest regional council in the country, and they've been exploiting the Dead Sea for so long. They actually, do have, the capabilities of doing it. But when they see a nice Jewish boy, an American like me, they see a friar. They say, you know what? Okay, let him go out and, and figure it out, and then we'll exploit him, later on.
Also, they might be influenced by the lobbyists and by the owners of the businesses. And
well, they would benefit greatly from it. So, that's something which is positive. Actually, from what I understand from the hotels in the Dead Sea, they're so frustrated with the Tamar Regional Council, they want to actually cede and go to another council.
And what about the edges of Arad? That wasn't an option?
So I was thinking, proper, and I was thinking, maybe by En-Gedi. The truth is, kibbutzim that are there, in some way, today, they're elitist places. I can't just go to kibbutz and become a member. I could be a resident there, but if I'm going to build a museum, by En-Gedi, who's going to benefit from it? It's the landowners. It's the kibbutz members. Well, then they should be funding it. Why would I go out and raise money for something that's going to benefit them? We should be doing it together. They should be putting some skin in the game. And I couldn't find any real partners at the Dead Sea itself. And sometimes before you do something big, you do something small. You see how people act in something small? And I decided, the museum's going to take years. Let me make a first step. And I created the deadseamuseum.com, which is actually a virtual museum, which I had architects design. Newman Heiner Associates, who are just incredible architects. They came up with the vision, of the building and the interior for the internet. It's floating in the middle of the Dead Sea, and I had to then now create an exhibition. So how do I get content? I established the world's first international photo competition for the Dead Sea, which we launched on the beginning of Corona on Earth Day back in 2020, and we had about 15,000 photos submitted.
Wow.
From about 3,500 photographers spanning 40 countries around the world, including Jordan, Bahrain, a lot of the Arab countries. And I put together a jury of judges, including Spencer Tunick and Casey Kelbo and Karen Bargil and Noam Bedin. And we used a platform called Guru Shots, which is an Israeli startup, which is amazing. And now I had this incredible material to put. We chose 40 works that would be in the actual exhibition. And the idea was to have a physical and a virtual one. Mm-hmm. So the physical one was going to be actually by the Minus 430 Gallery near Kibbutz Kalya by Kalya Beach. And it was a cooperation project between the Tamar Regional Council and the Megillot Regional Councils. Both were putting in a little bit of budget. I was raising most of the money. It was still very much like bare bones, grassroots. And it came to the time of signing a contract. And the Tamar Regional Council said, we want you to sign a clause that gives us exclusive rights to the images from the exhibition that we could use for our marketing purposes. I said, guys, these are artists. I have the rights to show their work in an exhibition. We could market their images in connection with the competition, in connection with the exhibition. I can't even legally sign this, and this is exploitive. And they refused to back down. And to me, that was really just like, an eye-opening moment saying, wow, for 40,000 shekel they were contributing. This is how they act. So I canceled it. They were shocked. I said, I'm not going to have an exhibition. Forget it. And then I kind of searched for a location. And someone suggested Arad. I went to a woman called Anna Sandler, who was running the tourism for Arad. And she's like, yeah, this is great. I'd love to have it. Let me connect you with the Matnas Arad, which is their cultural center. There's a guy there called Oren Amit, who's running the cultural program. And he just said, yes. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, let's do it. And that was it. I kind of felt like, like then when in the biblical times, when God decided to give the Torah to the nations of the world, and everyone says, well, what's in it for me? And they came to the Jewish nation. I said, well, of course, now 7 Shema. That's all I needed from Arad was just an answer like yes. And I worked with them. I raised the money, got sponsorship, and we put together an incredible exhibition. And it was kind of like this, I said, like this religious experience for me, because I never thought of Arad. Even though, personally, when I first came to Israel in 1997, I actually came to a program in Arad called WUJIS, which was stood for the World Union of Jewish Students. I learned Hebrew there. I absorbed the culture. I traveled around. My first week there, I met my future wife. And our first son was actually born in Seattle. And
but conceived in Arad.
No. But the love started in Arad.
Oh, okay.
And no, he was born in Seattle, and unfortunately he was born with asthma. And literally, we named him Arad, and the best place in the world for him is actually Arad. And I told him when we came back to Israel in 2007, I took him to Arad, and I said, Arad, this is your city. One day you're going to come here, return to its glory. So it was just so funny to be there years later, having an opening reception at the Matnas, my son Arad with me, with the mayor talking together, and we kind of rebranded Arad. I didn't realize Arad is actually the natural gateway to the Dead Sea.
It's also, guys, one of the cities in Israel with the worst image, I guess, worst, public conception in Israel.
Yeah, I was just telling you before the show that I'm allergic, quote unquote, to Arad because many of the people in the army, they pass through in the Nachal Brigade, they pass through Arad because the Nachal Brigade training base The basic training base is right next to Arad. So
okay.
a lot of people have like traumatic memories of Arad because it's the sun, it's the base, it's the city where they go through on Sunday on the way back to the military. But the truth is, I've heard amazing things in recent years about Arad and about kind of the cultural revival that's happening there.
I mean, it's a really, really special, beautiful city.
It's the first Israeli city that was completely planned from scratch.
Yeah,
which makes it like really well organized.
Well planned. The best air quality in the country. One of the best air qualities in the world.
But Haredi settlements. Loads of problems with Haredis there.
You know what? No. I mean, there are Haredim there. And, 10 years ago, there was no Haredim at the Dead Sea at all. And they made such problems for us for the installation. In Arad, there is a population. And they didn't interfere at all. They were very, very respectful about it. This was something that was done privately for art. Of course, they weren't maybe happy with it, but they didn't create any problems at all. And it was like a walk in the park for us.
So we don't have much time. Where is the museum standing as of today?
So I've told so many stories. And the museum, well, first of all, it's not standing yet. It lives in the virtual space. So at the deadseamuseum.com. Now we have an exhibition of Spencer Tunick's works from 2011, 2012, and 2016 in the virtual museum. And it's going to be there for 6 months. We had a Head Start campaign, which, by the way, people could still contribute to. It's still ongoing.
We'll leave a link, guys.
But through the money that I've raised in the Head Start campaign, that enabled me to bring Spencer Tunick back to do another installation in Israel, which we did in Arad, by the actual site we plan to build a museum. So not only was this exhibition that we did so successful, the partnership with the mayor and the city really strengthened. And the mayor wanted to bring Spencer Tunick here. So he was 100% behind it, made sure it happened. And I think the media coverage we got this time was even greater than we had 10 years ago. So CNN, BBC, New York Post, I mean every media outlet in Israel, but it went Associated Press, it went worldwide. And I was able to raise some more money to actually pay the architects to create design-specific plans for the museum in Arad. So today, I'm much more further along than I was, a few years ago.
You have an actual plot that you're...
Yeah, the museum, the city has allocated 22 dunum of land, which is about 5.5 acres.
Which is pretty amazing.
It's a nice piece of land. You could see in the background the Dead Sea. It's right by the desert edge. And Arad is reestablishing itself as this ecotourism city. People are really tired of these concrete jungles, and especially COVID, things change. Those types of big hotels at the Dead Sea, they yearn for a better experience in nature. So glamping is becoming very big now, and the whole desert experience and hiking and biking around there. So Arad has this strategic advantage in terms of the landscape to take advantage of it. Even the latest Midburn was held by Arad. So there's definitely this return and love of the desert. So it's a great location for it. And I've got to kind of figure out how I got there and raise money.
So you have the land, you have the plans.
I have the land. I've got the designs. We're finalizing the budget, and then I have to go out and professionally raise the money with the city.
Right.
It's not going to be a personal museum. It's going to be a public museum that my Amutah, the Dead Sea Revival Project, will operate. My dream is to leave high tech, to focus 100% on art and on establishing this museum and running it to the point of bringing 1 million visitors a year.
Wow. That's amazing. I think it has huge potential. How much will it cost to build the museum?
The early estimates are about $50 million, but it's still very early. I mean, I can
do it for you for 25. No problem.
Let's talk after the show.
What's scary about museums though is that you have this budget to build it, and it takes a lot of fundraising, a long time, and then you want to operate it, and you can't get an audience. And then and then you're bleeding cash. You need to then rely upon the public, to kind of subsidize it. So I came up with a very unique, business plan, where I need to raise money to build it 100%. But I'm not going to be a museum like the Tel Aviv Museum of Art or the Israel Museum. Those museums are incredible. They exist for a certain purpose. They're collecting museums. They cover a range of items and collectibles. I want to focus on experience and architecture first. Second is in terms of the art. It's all going to be immersive, experiential, digital art. Something where you come in And the work that will be shown will be related to the Dead Sea and the environment. So it's going to be commissioned from artists. The museum will own those videos. But we're going to talking about maybe every year there'll be 1 or 2 exhibitions, and that videos could actually be shared with other museums around the world. I've partnered with an organization called Superblue, which is an offshoot of the Pace Gallery, one of the biggest galleries in the world. They represent Israeli artists named Michal Rovner, international artists like Team Labs, and they've created a center now in Miami, another one in London, and they're opening these types of centers around the world. Van Gogh Live is a poor example of what immersive experiential art looks like, but that's been playing all over the world for years now. So I think it's something which is like the wave of the future. There's a Yo-Yo Kurosawa event exhibition going on now at the Tel Aviv Museum of Art, and people are lining up. It's sold out. They love that kind of experience. So that's an idea in terms of the art. Then we have the landscape, the 20 dunum of land of the desert. The last aspect is going to be a balloon, a tandem balloon that will take you up in the air, give you the best view of the desert and the Dead Sea. And of course, there's going to be an amphitheater. There's for the city. There's going to be a restaurant. And that's the vision, that anyone that's going to kind of pass through the Dead Sea is going to want to start or finish a journey there.
Wow. Very cool.
That's awesome.
Very cool.
Got goosebumps thinking about it. No, it really is. Yeah. It's an amazing idea, not just for Arad, but for Israel in general. I mean, it has so many ramifications, and it really ripples out. That's amazing.
Very inspiring, Ari. So you said people can still contribute and...
Yeah, I mean, it's first of all, you go to the deadseamuseum.com. You'll see a donate button there that will take you to the Head Start campaign. There's also a contact. People could reach out to me. I need help. And I mean, this is not something that I'm personally funding. I'm investing my time and energy and innovation, but I need the public to be a part of it, individually and collectively.
And if someone knows how to get 50 mil, also they can reach out.
Listen, lots and lots of little contributions add up. So it could be individuals who have significant funds that want to be a part of this, or it could be people who just want to support it. I mean, if I convince you, which I may have done already, that the Dead Sea is super important and you don't want to see it deteriorate and disappear, and I'm saying, all right, save the save the forest, give $10. Well, there's no giving $10 to the Dead Sea today that will actually make an impact. But when you give $10 to the Dead Sea Revival Project, the Amuta, goes towards this museum project, is actually making an impact. We've already proven ourselves in terms of the content we've done, both through Noam's photographs, his lectures, we've done with Spencer Tunick. So we're constantly making headlines around the world and making people aware of what's going on. So it's a good use of funds.
That's amazing. That's awesome. Before we go,
yes,
this episode and this podcast is made in collaboration with IsraelNationalNews.com. Check them out. Arutz Sheva, IsraelNationalNews.com. For news, for opinion pieces. The podcast is up on the website, again, IsraelNationalNews.com, and of course...
Also, the Australian Jewish news, check them out at ajn.timesofisrael.com for the Australian angle on Jewish news. Also, go to tunjb.com/merch.
Yes,
and either get your mug.
Actually, this mug is really cool.
Yeah.
Do I get one also, or do I have to pay for it?
Well, no, of course, you're a guest. Now you put us on the spot, so we have to give you one for free. No, I'm kidding.
How about the one that I take for free?
Yeah,
we kind of sell to one of the listeners now, and we charge them a higher price.
Yeah, okay. So they're $40 now.
Yeah. So guys, you have
You have to make an exhibit in the Arad Museum. The cup.
Just included in the shop.
Jewish boy BDS tears. What else do you have?
That's what we have right now.
Hopefully soon, once people start buying them in the millions, we'll make a nice Jewish girl cup.
Yeah.
Because we are about equality. But go to 2njb.com/merch and get your mugs. They're great gifts for Hanukkah. Hanukkah's right around the corner.
Yep.
And of course, we do this on our free time. So go to 2njb.com/donate and help us out. But of course, not before you donate to the Arad Museum.
Yeah.
To the Dead Sea Museum.
Both. You can do both.
Yes, that's
absolutely
true. That's true.
Thank you so much.
You guys,
it's really inspiring.
Thank you for having me. Hope I didn't speak too much.
No.
That's the point of having you on.
I think it was the cup that inspired me.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Ari.
Bye, guys.
Bye.